Welcome everyone to today's webcast, The Secret to Becoming CFO of Your Portfolios. My name is Nicole Tucker and I am a marketing manager here at UMT360 and I'll be the moderator for today's session. Before I introduce today's speaker for the webinar, I want to touch base on a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and we will be sharing the link with all of you to view the recording after today's session. You can also request a copy of the slides at that time. The audience will be muted throughout the session. If you have a question, you may enter it into the Q&A moderator in the GoToWebinar interface, and we will answer it with the time remaining at the end of the session. There will also be an exit survey at the end of the session. It's 4 short questions, and we'd very much appreciate your feedback. With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Frank LaRocca. Frank is the Director of Business Improvement Services within the finance organization at Consolidated Edison. He is responsible for investment optimization, both capital and O&M, and the Enterprise Project Management Office. Prior to Con Edison, Frank spent 20 years at Keyspan Energy in the information technology area. In 2002, he assumed the role of VP of Information Technology and CIO. Frank brings a strong and diverse background, including all aspects of information technology and financial governance. Frank is a great speaker, and I have no doubt the session today will be very valuable to everyone. So with that, Frank, I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Now I feel extremely old listening to that very long bio, but it's always good to have a photoshopped photo of myself on the front screen. And I'm happy to be here today. Today, as you said, is called The Secret to Becoming the CFO of Your Portfolios, a very provocative title. So I hope to share some of the successes we've had at Con Edison. So the agenda for today will be how can you adopt a strategic mindset within your PMO and take it from the technical more to the strategic. I'll have an overview of what I call portfolio optimization, an overview of what I call dynamic planning. We'll go through some governance and metrics, and I'll take some questions at the end. And really, it's all about asking the right questions in your portfolio. Con Edison manages about $2.5 billion, and so my group is responsible for being the stewards of that money. And so it's an awesome accountability, and we put many processes in place to be able to meet the expectations of the organization. So with that, I'll give a brief overview of Con Edison. You can read the slides, so I'm not going to drain it, but you could see that beautiful picture on the top right. I actually live in Manhattan, and I almost see the same exact view from that photo. So it's a beautiful skyline, and every time I look out the window of my apartment, I think about how fortunate I am to work for a company that powers the city of Manhattan. So you can read that we have $12 billion in annual revenue and $41 billion in assets, and so forth and so on. So let's get right into the heart of today's presentation. So as Nicole mentioned, prior to this, I spent 20 years at Keyspan Energy, and now it's 9 years at Con Edison. So if you're doing the math, I'm about 25 years old, but when you think about it, in both instances, both companies, I found that it really starts with asking the big questions. And some of the questions I have listed on the screen might seem easy to answer, but I found in both experiences of mine, Keyspan and Con Ed, these answers aren't as readily available as you would like. So I'm assuming that everybody in the room, most companies today have the pressure to do more with less. And what I found is that when you start asking around at the enterprise level and say, well, how much are we spending in projects and programs, and how much of that spend is discretionary? How much do we really have to do? How much is lights on? How much of that spend is in line with the corporate strategy? You can even ask, what is the corporate strategy? And how do you gauge, do we have the right metrics to measure the effectiveness of our portfolios and of our spend? And are we getting the appropriate ROI for the value of the portfolio? We're given all this money to be stewards of, and at the end of the year we spend $2.5 billion. did we get the value that we hope to get out of that? So I find that asking those big picture questions are really at the heart of this and what the PMO should be doing. Most PMOs that I've talked to focus on, you know, what status are all the projects. So red, amber, green status reporting. I'm not saying that you don't do that. That's obviously important to do, but that's not where it ends. I think that's just where the job begins. You have to really ask the big picture strategic questions, and once you start asking those questions, then a lot more data and metrics come into play. So let me walk you through how I have my organization structured. I break my organization. This is one component of my organization. This is around the EPMO, which stands for Enterprise Program Management Office. And half of the organization is focused on optimization, and the other half is focused on management. And you can see I broke it up into 4 chevrons. How does the organization propose projects? After you propose them, how do you select them? After you think you have the right project selected, how do you manage those projects? Once you think you have the right project selected, how are you managing them? And then at the end of this all, how are you measuring the success of those projects? So it's cradle to grave of project ideation all the way through execution and measurement. And we have these cute little taglines on the top. So optimization is all about doing the right projects, and management is all about doing projects right. And I think about it this way. If you have a great portfolio optimization methodology and you're really good at selecting the best projects and aligning to your corporate strategy, but then you have poor management or poor execution, your portfolio at the end of the year or the end of the budget cycle is going to lose value. On the other hand, if you have a poor optimization methodology and you're selecting not such great projects, and you have a really good management side, so whatever projects you give your project managers, they execute really well, you're also going to lose value. So you really need to be strong at both your optimization, your selection of projects, as well as the execution of projects. So I think they go hand in hand. So this is the audience participation part. We have a poll here of the folks in the audience. What's the biggest concern in your organization? Is it project selection, project management, or both? And this will help me see where I should spend more time during today's discussion.
Great, so I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll here. We'll give the audience a chance to make your selection. Project management, or both worry me. We'll give it about 5 more seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now and share the results with you all. So there you have it, Frank. We've got 36% saying project selection, 13% on project management, and about half of us are worried about both.
Okay, excellent.
So I'm going to go ahead and hide this now, and Frank will take it away with his slides.
Okay, so the slide that I showed earlier really made the process seem very simple, but I'm sure most people on the phone today realize that there's a lot of detail that goes beyond all of the chevrons. So what I tried to do on this slide is depict many of the processes that the EPMO, my group, has been focusing on underneath the bigger chevrons of create, select, plan, manage, and measure. So it makes sense that, you know, half of you are concerned with both, because as I said earlier, you need to have strong selection as well as execution. But what I would imagine is some of you are strong in one area and the other areas are concerning you more. So it sounded like for this audience more concern on the optimization side. So I'll go into that, and we have a fair amount of time today, so hopefully I'll cover it well, both pieces well, and then we'll take the time at the end for questions and answers. So on the optimization side, really what I found in both companies that I worked at, there was a methodology in place for how do people submit projects. So I always think about it like a funnel. And the mouth of the funnel is all of these great ideas coming in as we should do this and we should do that and we should spend money here and we should spend money there. And the bottom of the funnel is what comes out and where you select the best of the projects. So the optimization is the middle. It's the funnel itself. How do you actually take all of those great ideas and distill it down to the best ideas for the budget cycle and the budget that you have this year, because you can't do it all. And so what I found in both companies is during resource allocation planning time, we would sit in a room with a lot of senior officers, and there would be lists and lists of Excel spreadsheets of many, many proposals for projects with lots of acronyms. And basically we're asking the senior officer team to approve a portfolio of projects without a lot of transparency, without a lot of information on each one of the projects. And typically what would happen behind the scenes before these large meetings is you had some really good vice presidents who could pre-network, and they would network around and get their project to be well known or funded or develop some great slides, and by the time it gets to the optimization or the resource allocation meeting, it's already like privately approved. And so I just observed that it really wasn't the most effective process. So what I've done is created this whole governance process around optimization. So in Con Edison now we have one repository for where people submit their business cases. We call them white papers or business cases. One repository. Within that, the sponsor of the project has to rate it and evaluate it across the company's strategic value and strategic goals. I will discuss that in a bit. We do some high-level cost-benefit estimating, some contingency estimating, and we discuss a little bit about risk. So it's a standardized methodology by which we are using to collect capital project ideas. And the good part about this is that if everybody's using the same submission methodology, then you're able to do an apples-to-apples comparison. Because what I also found is in the past, people were using different methodologies to calculate return on investment. Some were using 5 years, some were using 7 years payback, and all these different types of things that made it impossible to compare one investment to another. So I'll walk through the optimization piece in a bit of detail in some subsequent slides. As I mentioned earlier, if you look at the bottom of the screen, we spend about $2.5 billion. It all comes through my group. We use the UMT360 software as our repository for these white papers and these business cases. I have 3 employees that manage the optimization process. They get very, very busy during resource allocation time. So usually somewhere between March and June is when the optimization process hits. Then when we get on the management side, it's really all about, okay, are projects starting on time? Who is the project manager? Do they know they're accountable? Are they spending in according to their forecasts? And we have a whole governance process around making sure that the execution is happening as it should be. And if they need help, we provide help. And I should mention that for a second. We're a PMO, but we want to be a warm and friendly PMO. We don't want to be a PMO that is regarded as big brother or an auditor or people are afraid of us. We want people to want to use us. We want to be trusted advisors for our project managers so that they feel comfortable calling us with issues. They ask us questions. We know where some other project managers in the company have great practices or tools, so we try to be the conduit for other project managers to communicate across the company. So on the management side, we have about $1 billion automated from a governance perspective using UMT360. The rest of it is on Excel, but we're converting it all to UMT360 within the next year. We should have year or 16 months, we should have everybody up and running on UMT, because really we invented this whole thing on spreadsheets, but it's not possible to have $2.5 billion worth of capital spend managed in spreadsheets. We absolutely needed a tool, and the tool has grown with us as we have developed this process. So all the way from optimization through execution and measuring, we're using the tool. So today we'll talk a little bit about optimization and a little bit about management. So what's the goal of the create and select phases? And I mentioned this before, but I'll reiterate. Really, it's about how can you standardize the methodology by which your company makes investment decisions. You want an apples-to-apples comparison. We have in Con Edison, we have a gas business unit, we have an electric business unit, we have a steam business unit, we have many different business units, as I'm sure many of you on the call have. And so sometimes you want to compare, you know, is it better to do an IT project this year, or is it better to do, literally build a transformer in Manhattan to, increase reliability? So we're comparing very different types of projects to one another. So this apples-to-apples comparison helps us make less of a subjective decision and more of an objective decision on our investments. We certainly want to make sure that our project spend is in alignment with our corporate strategy, and we want to remove as much subjectivity as possible. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we do is, before I go there, let me just talk about some common problems that I see when you don't have a methodology like this. So if you don't have a standard methodology of selecting projects, as I said before, you have those vice presidents who are very good at creating slideware, and they do the pre-meetings and they get everything funded in advance. Small business units often lose in that case because, the big business units are the ones with the big dollars, and they get to do what they want to do. So it's really important to have a methodology to compare, as I've been saying all along, apples to apples. And we also have this concept of mandated work. We're a utility, we're governed by the Public Service Commission, and oftentimes they make sure that we do specific projects, and we call that work mandated. When I began this process, both at Keyspan and Con Edison, a lot of the projects that would come to the table would get this label of mandated, and therefore it was felt like we had to do that. Well, we had to put some rules around that. What does it truly mean to be mandated? What does it truly mean to be operationally required? And for those of you in the room who are not regulated, you can think about this as what's truly discretionary versus non-discretionary. So we were really able to put some parameters around this to make sure every program or project had an equal opportunity to be funded. So where does it all begin? I think it begins with your corporate strategy, and I would say this both at Keyspan and Con Edison. Let me talk about Keyspan first. I remember when I was named CIO, and I was called up to the CEO's office one day. Actually, it was the COO's office, and he, was all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and all excited about, running IT and all that good stuff. And he said, so the first thing I want you to work on is I think we spend way too much in IT, and I don't think that our spend is in alignment with the corporate strategy. So I want you to reduce IT spend, and I want you to improve alignment. And I was like, oh, okay, what did I get myself into? So I went back and I thought about it, and I said, well, let me find out what is the corporate strategy and how well are we, where is our projects going? I think we're spending in alignment with the corporate strategy, but I honestly didn't have a way to measure that. So I found a couple of slides that talked about Keyspan's vision, and ultimately I distilled that into a set of drivers. And I did pretty much the same thing at Con Edison, and on the screen what you're seeing now is our set of Con Edison strategic drivers. Some of them are blanked out, just for confidentiality, but we're a utility. I'm assuming most people on the phone would understand that we would want to reduce and manage risk. We would want to provide reliable service. We would want to sustain environmental excellence. So as the leader of your PMO, if most of you are in the room are leaders of your PMO, you really have to think about, well, what is the corporate strategy, and how can you measure your alignment to it? And I found this interesting. I didn't expect this to be part of my role at Keyspan nor here, but oftentimes you have to take the corporate strategy and distill it into action-oriented drivers, and that's what these are. We call them strategic drivers, and we make them sound like a verb. They all begin with they all have to have an action sense to them. So they all begin with the verb reduce, provide, sustain, strengthen, enhance. So I find that you need to articulate the corporate strategy first, and then you can align to it. So that's what we did at Con Edison. We named these 9 drivers. And the other big thing that needs to be done is after you name the drivers and you get all your corporate leadership involved in naming the drivers and getting them to sign off on it, you have to ascribe a weighting to them. So what we do normally is we did what's called a pairwise comparison, and we walk all the officers through these 9 drivers, and we ask them to compare one to the other. And actually the software does it for you, and the result is you get a percentage for each driver. So for Con Edison, you would read this that reduce and manage risk is at 15%, provide reliability is at 15%, and the way to read this is, we have to, as I said to you earlier, we're governed by the Public Service Commission. We have to think about, well, what would their reaction be if they saw this slide? And the one thing we want to convey is, by reading the slide, you would not draw the conclusion, oh, so Con Ed really doesn't care about sustaining the environment. It's so low on the priority scale, and it's only got like 7.5%. So Con Ed really doesn't care about it. And that's not how to read this. The way to read this is, we care about the environment so much, it's one of our 9 drivers. It's the one. It has bubbled up to the point where it is so visible that all of our capital projects are making sure that we're spending in alignment with the corporate strategy, and it is one of the 9 pillars of our corporate strategy. What this does say, though, is if we only had $1 to spend next year, we would spend 15 cents on reduce and manage risk, another 15 cents on provide reliable service, and about 7.5 cents on sustaining the environment. Why is that? And that's because we believe already that we are doing a good job at sustaining the environmental excellence, and that for the upcoming year, Con Edison would get a bigger bang for its buck by investing more in reliability and safety than in environmental excellence. So that's how you would read the slide. First thing you want to do is define your strategic drivers, get your senior officer team to weigh in on them, and then rank them, because everything can't be of equal importance. And the whole objective here is now you have to say, okay, well, what are the projects, and how do those projects align to this corporate strategy? And the note on the bottom says here that we, on a biannual basis, we revisit these drivers and see if they're stale, if we need to reprioritize them. Obviously, when I was doing this back at Keyspan after 9/11, security certainly jumped up dramatically. After the market has crashed a couple of times, you're going to want to reprioritize these things, mostly from outside events that impact your corporation. So let me move on to the next slide. So how does this come together? So what I have here is a sample project, which is actually my project, UMT3 expansion into one of our STEAM portfolios. Every single project has to be rated across those 9 drivers. So on the top you see those 9 drivers, some of them blanked out again. And the sponsor of the project comes to the table with their white paper or their business case filled out, and they fill out what they think their project rates across these 9 drivers. So I would tell you, for those of you on the phone, that 9 out of 10 times the sponsor of the project is going to fill out this and say that their project gets an extreme rating on all 9 drivers. It's just human nature. They think their project is their best thing since sliced bread, and they're going to want to get it funded. So the sponsors' ratings are generally overinflated. You have to have a process in place to right size or vet the sponsors' ratings with reality. And so what you can see here on my particular project, I only have ratings on 3 of the 9 drivers: enhance external relationships, reduce and manage risk, and strengthen the company processes. So just 3 impacts to 9 of the drivers. And then what goes on behind the scenes in the tool is there's math. So an extreme gets a rating of a 9, a strong is 6, moderate 3, low 1. And when you combine that number with the weighting of the driver, that's how you get your strategic value score. So a project that gets an extreme rating on a driver that's rated the top driver is going to bubble up as very high strategic value. A project with a lot of nones are going to, it's not going to bubble up at all. So, so what this means is your folks have to fill out their white paper or their business case and stack rank it against all of your corporate drivers, give it a self-rating, then you have a committee together that adjusts the ratings to normalize it, and when you're done with that, you end up with a prioritized list of strategic value, and you can do multi-dimensional analysis, such as the screen that I have up right now. On the screen here, each bubble represents a project. The left is strategic value, and the bottom axis is your cost. So if you were to break this into 4 quadrants, you would want your projects to be in the upper left, the upper left quadrant, high strategic value and low cost. And you would really challenge why you would do any project that appears in the far right. So low strategic value and high cost. So it's a great way to visualize. Remember I talked earlier about large spreadsheets of projects with a lot of acronyms. Now instead of looking at large spreadsheets and acronyms, you're looking at strategic value. Obviously we would label these bubbles so that you know which project falls where. And now you have a set of senior officers that are looking at a portfolio of projects on a scatter diagram that indicates how, alignment to corporate strategy and cost. And it's very, very difficult for a project that, is all the way out here on the, sort of moderate value and high cost, to get funded unless it's mandated or required. So it's a very good, strong visual tool to use to make sure that you're getting the right bang for your buck. What the tool can also do is, I'll draw your attention to this score here. The total score for this portfolio, and we used a sample of, let's say the total budget was $8 million. The number of projects selected, the green bubbles are selected, the white are excluded. So what the tool says is, for $8 million, you should choose these 15 projects, and your strategic value is at 83.25%. I'll draw your attention to these 3 bubbles here. Let's make believe that these 3 projects are literally mandated, and no matter what the score is, you have to do them. So you tell the optimizer, oh, you got to do them. So you force them in. So the optimizer says, okay, these 3 bubbles are now forced in. What you'll notice is, compared to the prior screen, these 3 bubbles were optimized out. And so now if you look at the stats here, for the same amount of money, you're only selecting 12 projects, and your strategic value went down. Your total portfolio strategic value went down. And why is this helpful to us or to anybody? Again, you can use this to show that mandated projects are cannibalizing the strategic value of your portfolio. In other words, another way of saying that is, as this slide indicates, we could have gotten 83% of our total strategic value for $8 million had we not done these 3 projects. But since we're forced to do those 3 projects, our strategic value goes down to 70%. So very, very helpful visual methodology to do your portfolio selection. And I'll go back once. I one time had a senior officer call me in and tell me that their project was in the far right quadrant, and he said, I really love this methodology, Frank. It's great. It's unbelievable. And we've needed this for a long time, but I need you to move my bubble. I need you to take my bubble from the far right and move it to the top left. And I was like, no, it doesn't work that way. You can tell me to execute the project. I mean, you're a senior officer. You can mandate that we do the project, but you can't tell me to move it because that would break the whole, methodology underneath it. So that was an interesting discussion. So we also think about our portfolios in concentric circles. So as I mentioned before, we have to do our mandated work. Then we look at operationally required. Then we always look at our in-flight. We've already approved them, so odds are we probably want to continue. But if the project has gone awry, if economic conditions have changed, if strategic value has changed, you might want to cancel the project. And after that, then you look at your strategic projects, and you want to prioritize them in order of cost savings, avoidance, or other. So another way of visualizing your portfolio and where your projects fall inside versus out are the highest value to the lowest value. So that is an overview of the optimization. There's a lot to it. I know I went fairly quickly, but I'll take some questions at the end. Now I'm going to turn our focus to more the managed side. And I just wanted to share with you that culturally at Con Edison, it's much better, or it had been much better, to dramatically underrun your project. So if your project was 10 million and you come in at 1 million, you know, you look like a hero, even though what that means to most project management people is that you held $9 million hostage throughout the year. Culturally, that's how it was over here. You know, you don't want to be a penny over, but it doesn't really matter how far under you were. So we're trying to change that culture. And what we found by talking to a lot of the project managers is, you know, the budget process was static. We set the original budget once at the beginning of the, you know, the end of the budget cycle, right before the new year begins, and then by the time January 1 hits, all of our estimates are already stale, and yet they're accountable to those same estimates for a year, and that didn't seem to be working for the project managers. So what did we do? We created what I call the sweep process, or dynamic allocation. We said we're not going to stick to the original estimates. We're going to hold our project managers accountable for reforecasting and cash flowing. We actually do it on a monthly basis now. We're going to challenge our underruns as much as we do overruns. We're going to pool our underruns into a surplus fund, and we're going to allow people to request money from that surplus fund. We're going to sanction releases and requests on a monthly basis, which we call a sanction process. And we're going to compare our month actuals to both the original budget and the sanction forecast. And we're going to document all of these sweeps. So in other words, we're going to allow project managers to reforecast. We're going to give them an opportunity to ask for more money. We're going to challenge them on releasing money back into the pool so that we can literally dynamically move money around and hold project managers accountable for recent forecasts as opposed to what somebody else might have said a year ago. So we have a process in place, our governance process, and we have it all culminates at a governance meeting. We have a gas governance meeting, we have a steam governance meeting, an electric governance meeting, and prior to this meeting there's several meetings, and unfortunately we couldn't come up with a better name other than a pre-meeting. So that's it's actually an official meeting invite. You'll get a meeting invite to a pre-meeting, but what we do there is we have pre-meeting. We have all the detailed folks. We talk to project managers, we talk to cost managers, and my EPMO sits there, and we challenge, and we question, and we advise, and we help, and we support all the project managers on their portfolio. And we summarize the output of that into the governance meeting. So my group in the middle there, we take all the information, and we say, okay, these projects are releasing funds, these projects are requesting funds, and we develop charts and metrics, and I'll show you that now. And then we go to the governance meeting and we present it for final approval or rejection. So at a high level, how does this work? We have our current budget. When project managers release, they give back money to the pool. We have project managers request, and they can ask for more money, either because the scope has changed or they're overrunning or whatever the case may be. And at the monthly governance meeting, we challenge these releases, we challenge the requests, and then we either decide to approve, reject, defer, or partially fund some of these requests. And that all adds up to the new sanction forecast for the portfolio. and we try not to exceed the original budget for that given portfolio. So how has this all been working? I'm going to walk you through a couple of slides as examples of how it's been working. This is a sample portfolio where we started, one of our portfolios had $188 million at the start of it. You can see that on the top left. In the first quarter, we released back into the pool $17.8 million. We funded $8 million worth of new projects, and we redirected, or we gave more funds to existing projects of about $7.8 million. So a lot of churn happened in the first quarter. If I fast forward all the way to the end of the year, if you look at the stats down the bottom, in total we released $35 million. We approved $17 million worth of new projects, and we've given existing projects $15 million of more funding. So I think this is it demonstrates immediate impact, because had we not had this sweep process in place, I can tell you for sure that new column, that $17.5 million worth of new projects, would not have had any mechanism to be funded before, and essentially all the projects that were granted the funds to begin with would have just underrun, and therefore we would essentially not effectively use that budget, leave that money sort of on the table. And so you know, it's not a spend it or lose it attitude. We're not here to spend money because we have money. We're here to spend money strategically. So when the governance committees reviews requests for new projects, we scrutinize them. We say, do you really need to do it? Why do you need to do it? What's the strategic impact? We challenge them very much so. And so these 17 and a half, it was actually 23 projects were approved this particular year in this portfolio. They would have never seen the light of day had we not had this process in place before. So I think this was a great stat. If you're the head of the PMO and you're able to show this, I think it actually demonstrates the value of the PMO right off the bat. If it wasn't for this PMO, we would not have been able to fund these $17.5 million worth of new projects. And you know, probably as PMO leads on the phone, you're thinking, well, that's a lot of churn. I mean, why after the quarter, you know, one quarter, quarter two, you're releasing, you know, almost $18 million. So that's what we're trying to figure out now. Why do we have that amount of churn in the beginning of the budget cycle? I want to go through another example with you. This was a live portfolio, and let's just imagine that we reforecasted in June. Well, let me walk you through the slide first. The gray line is our 2011 and 2012 average spend for this portfolio. So we just blended how much do we actually spend per month for the year in this portfolio. The purple line for this particular year was in 2013 is the actual spend. So the first thing you might notice is that the purple line and the gray line are almost identical. So our spending this year is very much like our past behavior. So that's a trend. What you'll also notice is that the forecast is the blue line. The forecast is, as you can see, as time goes on, gets dramatically higher than our trend from the past 2 years and our actuals. So another way to say this, in June, we said we were going to spend $80 million in this portfolio. We spent 74. Not too much of a big variance. In June, we said we were going to spend $98 million in August, and we spent $85 million. Variance is getting larger. In June, we said we were going to spend $122, and we actually spent $103. So you can see the variance between forecast and actuals is getting greater the more the distance from your reforecast. So I showed this slide in September to the committee that governs this portfolio, and I said, look, I don't know a lot of details about each one of these projects, but if you look at the past, it doesn't look like we're going to hit these forecasts. So I need you to reforecast again. And I said, does anybody in this room actually believe we're going to come in at 191? I believe we're going to come in closer to 173. Is anything different? Is anything new? Do we have more employees? Do we have more contractors? How are we going to spend this amount of money? So they looked around the room and they said, you know what, I think that's inflated. So they all went back to their projects and they reforecasted. And in fact, the the purple line at the end of the year was very close to the gray line. So how is this being the CFO of your portfolio? You're proactively controlling this. And when we were at this point in time, I said, I need you to reforecast. I don't think we're going to spend 191, so let's tell the company that instead of spending 191, we're going to probably spend around 180, which is what happened. So again, strong control of your portfolio, and through this control, we were able to give back $33 million from this portfolio to other portfolios at Con Ed. One last example. This is another portfolio from last year. You can see here, so far year to date, they had spent $326 million in this portfolio. Remaining for the year, 5 months of the year, they have to spend 310. So in less time, you have to spend almost the same amount of money as you already did in the first 7 months. But also, their forecast, when we say 7 plus 5 here, that's 7 months of actuals, 5 months of forecast. You can see that in August, their forecast is so high that their current run rate would almost have to double to meet their forecast. So this is their actual for July. They're projecting $90 million over here. Once again, I said, look, I don't know a lot about these projects or programs, but I'm looking at the math here, and I don't think you have the capacity to spend $90 million in 1 month. And so you have all the project managers sitting in the room, and the VP and the seniors, and they're all saying, but we have to spend this. And I said, listen, I'm not saying or suggesting that these projects aren't worthy. What I'm saying is I don't think you have the capability of spending to this level. And so the senior officer in the room agreed and said, this doesn't seem likely that we're going to spend $90 million in the month of August. So he asked them to go back and reforecast. So at this point in time in the year, again, we're in August, we're in July, projecting August. They said that they have $310 million to spend for the rest of the year, which I felt was inflated by looking at these stats. When you look at the next slide, the slide that I just brought up, the senior officer made them reforecast. They reduced their forecast by $21 million in the month of August, and they reduced their forecast at the year end by $9 million. So what do you think actually happened? Well, in August, they spent less than $69 million, and at the end of the year, they actually underran their portfolio. So why does this matter? It matters because when we showed this slide back in July, projecting August, they almost went to the board of directors to ask for more money in this portfolio. And if they did, and things worked out the same, they would have underrun, they would have asked for more, gotten approval for more, and actually underran the portfolio, which would have been, not well looked at. So the value of the PMO here was we spotted a trend, we put the data in front of them, we didn't mandate it, but we showed them just based upon what we think doesn't look like it's going to play out this way, and in fact it didn't. So I'd like to say, I can't say that we saved the company money, but I can certainly say that we've improved our forecasting, and we potentially avoided an embarrassing situation of asking for more budget and underrunning. So my second poll of the day is, how many of you are currently doing something like a dynamic reallocation or a sweeping methodology?
Great. So the choices are: we don't currently sweep, we plan to establish a sweep process, we do sweep, but the process is manual, and the last is we do sweep and the process is automated. So I'll go ahead and launch the poll. Give the audience an opportunity to vote. We'll give it a couple more seconds here. All right, looks like most of you have voted, so I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results. So Frank, we've got about almost 60% of the audience saying that they do not currently sweep, and some say they do, but the process is manual. Are these in line with your, or are these results in line with what you'd expect?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I haven't heard many other companies sweeping, as you will. So I think that hopefully this seminar will give everybody the idea to do it and how valuable it can be, and give you some ideas on how to do it. So it doesn't surprise me, and I also, we're in the process now of automating it. I think it's always wise to develop your process, through spreadsheets and manually at first, solidify the process, and then mechanize it, which is what we did. And now that we're using UMT360, that's what we're doing. We're mechanizing the sweep process through the software. So not a big surprise there.
Yeah.
I just have a few more slides. I'll talk about some trends. How is this all working, and then I'll turn it over to some questions. So as I mentioned to you, our processes have been in place from about 2009. In one of our portfolios back in 2009, we had $244 million worth of budget. We spent $200 million of that, meaning we only utilized 82% of the budget that we had. And back in, fast forward to 2015, for the same portfolio, we actually utilized 106% of the portfolio budget. In other words, we were able to demonstrate the value of going over budget for this particular portfolio. And because I govern other portfolios were underrunning, so we strategically moved money from other portfolios that were underperforming into this portfolio. And so nobody has a crystal ball at the beginning of the year to know where money needs to go. So having this dynamic reallocation enables you to do that in a way such that, portfolios can underrun and portfolios can overrun, and you can flex the money around. The last concept I'll talk about is what I call churn. You start the year, as I mentioned a number of times already, with a lot of prioritization, optimization, and planning, and then the year happens, and January begins, and you have all this projections, and your strategy can change, something could change in the finance world, your scopes can change, a number of things can change, and the portfolio that you end up executing is often not the portfolio that you planned, which is normal. I don't expect there to be zero churn, right? Things are going to happen. Emergencies happen. We're a utility. Weather is a big factor of our work, so we expect churn. It just depends on, I think it's healthy to measure the churn and try to develop some forecasting techniques on how to minimize the churn if you can. So here's one portfolio from last year where the portfolio total value is about $650 million. They were supposed to spend $51 million in a particular budget category, and when the year completed, again 2015 completed, we found that we actually only spent $25 million. Through my sweep process, we moved that money elsewhere, so it's not like it was lost, but we reduced the spend in this category, and for example, we increased the spend in the green category or the red category. And so again, I don't think that churn is a bad thing, but I think what the message to take out of here is, are you measuring your churn, and try to understand why is it happening. For example, if we consistently take money from this category and fund this category, should we plan for that instead of expecting to spend this and actually spending this? So it's about developing root cause, understanding why the churn is happening, and maybe better planning, forecasting, or budgeting as a result for the upcoming year. So my final slide is, it's difficult, where were we before all these processes? It was difficult to find a roster of in-flight projects, hard to track down who the project managers were, limited, start date and end date tracking, no resource reallocation. I didn't even talk about our project management society. We built a project management society, and one of the senior officers said, it's hard to measure the effectiveness of your group, but it's like a drop in the pond with many, many ripples, and it has an impact across the enterprise that it may be hard to measure, but it's definitely seen. And then lastly, so how do you do this? How do you become the CFO? You provide non-biased, proactive portfolio management governance. I think it's very important for your PMO to be neutral. I don't think you should take sides on any particular project, on any particular portfolio. You should just be neutral and making sure that everybody's following the process fairly. You want to influence project management, of course. You want to monitor the health of your projects and your portfolios. You want to increase your strategic budget utilization. You want to manage your churn, and you want to foster holistic versus siloed decision making. And now we're back to my highly photoshopped photo, and we're ready to take questions.
Great, thank you, Frank. That was an awesome presentation. I'm going to read off some questions in the order they were received. We have quite a few to go through. If we don't reach all of them in the next 9 minutes or so, we'll be sure to reach out to those individuals offline and answer them over email. The first question for you, Frank, is who reviews all the business cases that come in?
So there's a couple passes to that. So my group will review the initial draft of the business case. Actually, one of the women is sitting right next to me right now. So these white papers come in. There's many of them. We give it a reasonableness check. We make sure that, you know, the key information has been filled out. As I said earlier, usually the ratings are overinflated, and then we have these monthly governance committee meetings where the governance committee meeting will actually review each one of these white papers or business cases, and we right size. We call it a vetting process where we vet the ratings, and we make sure that when we give somebody an extreme that we're being consistent across the portfolio. So extreme means this, moderate means this, strong means this. So it's a committee of people that do the final review of the ratings.
Great, thank you. The second question here is from the same person, and it is, should it not be the responsibility of the senior leaders to not only listen to larger business units? It feels like there may be another portion of that question that I'm missing here, but that's the only part of the question I have. So I guess, should it be the responsibility of the senior leaders to listen to the larger business units? You know, I know you talked about that briefly.
Well, I think, you know, we had one organization that consistently felt like they were the underdog, that they only got whatever the large business unit wasn't going to spend, they got their table scraps, so to speak. And so what we found is when our optimization process would kick off, the large business units pretty much got highly funded, and the small business units got less funding. But once we put the sweep process in, and the large business units were not achieving their spend rate, we would sweep it away from them and give it to the small business units, and they benefited the most from the sweep process. So I think it shouldn't be a function of the size of the organization. I think it should be a function of the merit of the business case, and the merit of the business case should be the primary driver. So, you know, because there are maybe instances where an IT project is going to be, you know, IT is never going to be the largest organization in most companies, and a utility for sure. But maybe the IT project is so critical that it has more strategic value this year than replacing some pipe in the ground somewhere. I mean, you can't do that all the time, but you have to have some mechanism of evaluating it.
Great. So the next question here for you, Frank. With a formal governed process, do you ever have the complaint from the business that it takes too long to initiate a project? And if so, how do you overcome this?
In the beginning we did. Everybody felt like, oh, we don't need this, we're very good on our own. I think now, you know, any new process has growing pains. So I think in the beginning they're like, why do we have to wait for the meeting? This is holding us up. But, you know, it's a formal cadence, and once people got over the shock of more transparency, more accountability, then it really it doesn't become a burden, and it gets factored into your fabric of your corporate processes. And so I would say just initially we got that pushback.
Makes sense. So the next question here for you, and it refers to, I think, to a specific slide. The question is, so will something like sustain environmental excellence be pretty high in the first year of your prioritizing? And maybe another thing to go on top of that from the same individual is, when you normalized these prioritizations, what methods did you use?
So the first question is, it depends on the sustained environmental excellence. I think it all depends upon where you are on your KPIs. For those 9 drivers, we have KPIs that measure our effectiveness on all of them. And so if it's a brand new driver, I mean, I've been in the utility business my entire career, the drivers pretty much stay the same for utilities. So I haven't witnessed a brand new driver. It's not like we're going to go out and acquire a whole new business line. I would imagine that's possible, but at least in my business, it hasn't been. So I think if it was a new driver, it may bubble up, or if you're performing poorly on a particular aspect of your company, it may have a higher priority. But every 2 years, I find that the drivers stay the same, the prioritization, they move up slightly and down slightly, no dramatic changes, unless you have something like the market crash, 9/11. Those things really seem to impact the drivers in my existence, my experience in these 2 companies. And from the normalization perspective, the software itself does the pairwise comparison, and it normalizes all the scores. So I really didn't pay attention too much to the math. All we did was walk them through the pairwise questions. So how does driver A compare to driver B? How does driver A compare to driver C? And so forth and so on. And then the tool will calculate, are you being consistent, and what the prioritization is. So I didn't have to get involved in the normalization.
Great. Next question here for you. What is the average number of projects running at the same time?
So in our shared services portfolio, we have about 100. Our shared services portfolios like IT, facilities, vehicles, all the sort of shared services, back office type stuff. In our electric portfolio, we have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of projects and programs. So same thing in gas and steam. So we have many, many, many simultaneous projects going on. I would say in the thousands for Con Edison for sure.
Great. So yeah, the next question from someone was, how many projects do PMs handle? So you just touched on that. I'll move on to the next one here. In your experience so far, what is the largest cause of sweepable budget? Is it overinflation of budget proposals, or is it strategic realignment of projects, or something else?
That's a great question. I would say primarily it is over forecasting in the beginning. Again, our culture was overestimate, underspend, and you're a hero. Now I'm trying to instill the culture of, I'd rather you come in with plus or minus 2% of your forecast than, this dramatic underrun. So I think initially the reason that we were getting a lot of releases was because the original budget was overinflated. Now that the processes have been in place for a while, I think the overinflated estimates are going down. Most of the time our releases occur due to unable to complete the scope as originally planned. I don't want to say scope creep. I think it's just that underestimating how difficult it would be to deliver the original scope. So that's what I find to be happening now.
Great. A few more here. We probably won't get to all of them, but we'll try and wrap up. We'll just do this one last one, and then we'll sign off. So how and who determines the right balance for resources and budget against the 9 critical areas?
So we're governed by the Public Service Commission, and so there's an entire rate case process that we go through that says, we have to demonstrate why we need X amount of dollars to do what we need to do. Obviously we're powering Manhattan. We want to provide a safe and reliable utility experience for our customers. So the Public Service Commission and us, we make a business case for why we need to spend a certain amount of money. So there's a whole rate case process that goes on in a utility. But what we do is once we get that number, then we say, okay, this is the amount of money we have. Let's strategically optimize the projects that we have in the hopper to further align to our strategy.
Great. Okay, well, it is the top of the hour. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and thank you so much to Frank for sharing his story with us. I know a lot of you have asked over the chat window if this webinar recording and slides will be available, and the answer is yes. We will go ahead and send you a link to the recording and a copy of the slides in the next day or so. With that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you on the next UMT360 webinar series. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.